Hey everyone, in this video I will explain the entire loot and combat systems in WUCHANG Fallen Feathers. I finished the game a few days ago and it took me a while to finally understand how items and the combat works, so hopefully I can provide some useful information for all of you watching. I'm going to try and keep this video short, sticking only to the key elements of these two systems, because if I were to explain everything it would take a very long time. Let's get right into it. Starting off with the loot or itemization system, there are a few important things you need to know. There are 5 weapon classes, spells and Jade Pendants. These are the key elements making up your build and playstyle. The 5 weapon classes are Longswords, Axes, Dual Blades, One-Handed Swords and Spears. Each weapon class has its own playstyle, meaning it has a main attack stat and associated control stats. Before we can get into each weapon class and their stats, we need to discuss about attack and control stats. Attack stats are the ones you can see under the attack category when highlighting any weapon, and they are slash, blunt, stab, feathering, magic, fire and lightning. This will show you how much damage the weapon does according to the type of attack you are performing. Regular attack combo strings usually contain a mix-up of slash, blunt and stab attacks, and depending on the weapon class, your attack combos will focus on one of the 3 attack types. Control stats are the ones displayed above the 4 feathers, and these are strength, agility, magic and feathering. These will directly reflect the amount of points you have invested in each stat in the skill tree. The important part here is understanding what level numbers mean and what the numbers in parentheses mean. The level of each stat represents the scaling power of the weapon with that particular stat. Just like you have weapon scaling in the form of alphabet letters in other Souls games, here it is represented by levels instead, from 1 up to 6, with 1 being the lowest scaling and 6 being the highest. This means you want to use the weapons that have the highest level of scaling you can get, unless you care about the trait of a weapon more than its damage scaling. You also want to put as many points as you can into the control stats that your weapon is scaling with the most, to maximize your damage output. For example, looking at my Watcher's Gaze sword, it has a magic scaling of 5, which is the highest one I have, so it is my main weapon and I am putting all possible points into magic. The numbers in parentheses, if they do exist, represent the minimum requirement of stat points to activate the scaling on that weapon. These are generally very low requirements, so nothing to worry about. Depending on the weapon class, they will scale with different control stats and will focus on different attack stats, which will dictate your playstyle and damage type you should focus on. There can be exceptions to these rules depending on the weapon's skill, which you can see at the top below the weapon's name. Some weapons have skills of a certain attack type such as feathering, magic, fire or lightning, in which case they will also come with a control stat and or attack stat to match their skill, but they will compensate for that by having lower slash, blunt and stab attack stats. Looking at the Longsword class attack stats, we can see that most of them have slash attack as the highest stat, followed by stab, and then the lowest is blunt. This means that if you're using a longsword, your main damage type will be slashing. Looking at the Longsword class control stats, we can see that most of them are scaling with strength and agility, so you would want to focus on putting as many points into those 2 stats according to the specific weapon. Moving on to the Axes class attack stats, we can see that most of them have blunt attack as the highest stat, followed by slash and then the lowest is stab. This means that if you're using an axe, your main damage type will be blunt. Looking at the Axes class control stats, we can see that most of them are scaling with strength, so you would want to focus on putting as many points into that stat according to the specific weapon. Moving on to the Dual Blades class attack stats, we can see that most of them have stab attack as the highest stat, followed by slash and then the lowest is blunt. This means that if you're using a dual blade, your main damage type will be stab. Looking at the Dual Blades class control stats, we can see that most of them are scaling with agility, so you would want to focus on putting as many points into that stat according to the specific weapon. Moving on to the One-Handed Swords class attack stats, we can see that most of them have stab and slash attack as the highest values, and then the lowest is blunt. This means that if you are using a one-handed sword, your main damage type will be slash and stab. Now, one-handed swords are a bit of a special weapon class because they are the only ones coming with the spell power and magic attack stats. That makes one-handed swords the best weapon for a spell-focused build. Since you will mostly focus on casting spells when using one-handed swords, you should always focus on maxing the magic stat in your skill tree. Looking at the one-handed swords class control stats, we can see that most of them are scaling with magic, which goes hand in hand with their attack stats and playstyle, so you would want to focus on putting as many points into that stat according to the specific weapon. Moving on to the Spears class attack stats, we can see that most of them have stab attack as the highest stat, followed by slash, and then the lowest is blunt. This means that if you're using a spear, your main damage type will be stab. Looking at the Spears class control stats, we can see that most of them are scaling with agility and also strength, so you would want to focus on putting as many points into those two stats according to the specific weapon. Besides attack and control stats, weapons can also have a status attack and a trait, which can be seen above and below the control stats section. One last thing we need to discuss when it comes to weapons is their skills. You can notice that each weapon comes by default with two skills. The skill at the top, which is mapped to your L1 button on the controller, is called the weapon skill, and this is unique to each weapon and cannot be changed. This will usually dictate the weapon's attack stat as well, such as feathering, fire, lightning, and so on. The skill at the bottom, which is mapped to your L2 button on the controller, is called a discipline, and this can be changed at any time with other disciplines you have unlocked in your skill tree. Each weapon class comes with its own default discipline skill whenever you loot an item, and these are the following. Longswords come with the blink kick discipline, axes come with the block discipline, dual blades come with the sudden strike discipline, one-handed swords come with the flickering blade discipline, and spears come with the aerial bulwark discipline. Some weapon classes have special discipline skills only found on that class's skill tree that can define your entire playstyle. For example, Longswords is one of the only classes with a discipline that guarantees a deflect when used, which can be very useful against enemies with swords or spears. One-handed swords are the only weapons with a passive Skyborn might generation discipline, which makes them perfect for a spellcaster playstyle. Now that we are done talking about weapons, let's move on to spells. Spells come in three types: magic, feathering, and other. Magic and feathering types are referring to their damage types, and other is used for support spells. Similarly to weapons, spells also have their own status attack and control stats, which in this case can only be magic or feathering according to the spell type. It is ideal to match the type of the spells you are using with your sword control stat scaling to get the most out of your spellcaster build. If you're using a sword with magic as the main stat, you should ideally use magic type spells, and the same applies for feathering. Besides the stats, spells also have a Skyborn might cost, ranging from 1 to 5, which is the maximum. Moving on to Jade Pendants, these are just simple items with very basic effects that can complement your build, and you can only equip 3 at a time, so choose wisely. Nothing else to explain here since it's pretty basic. Last thing we have to talk about when it comes to items is the armor. Armor doesn't do anything special besides providing you with mitigation and resistance stats. You can combine various armor pieces to increase your resistance to certain status effects or attack types, which can be extremely useful in certain situations. For example, if you're fighting a boss that does a lot of sword attacks, you want to stack up on slash and stab mitigation. If you're fighting a boss that does a lot of fire attacks, just stack up on burn resistance and so on. Before we can get into combat mechanics, let's discuss about Benediction and Tempering. Benediction is a pretty simple system. It's basically augments for your weapons. You can have 3 Benedictions equipped at most, and some of them are part of Benediction sets of 3. If you equip 3 Benedictions of the same set, you get a powerful effect. These are similar to Jade Pendants, except they have more powerful effects and they can really make a difference in your build and playstyle. Moving on to Temper, this is another mechanic that is applied to your weapon to boost your damage even further. Tempering is done using items called needles, and these come in 2 categories: bone needles and stone needles. You can only equip 1 bone needle and 4 stone needles at a time. You can unlock temper slots through the skill tree. Bone needles always have effects that give you status effect build up or boost one type of damage, such as magic or poison. Stone needles usually have complementary effects such as boosting status build up or increasing the duration of tempering. In order to actually use tempering, you need to have the temperance consumable item equipped on your item's hotbar. The amount of temperance you can carry at a time ranges from 1 to 3, depending on how many you have unlocked in the skill tree. Now, there's only one thing left to talk about, and that is the combat system. It's not a particularly complex system, so I'll just stick to the key points. The most important aspect of combat by far is the Skyborn Might mechanic. This is essentially your mana system from other games, which is what allows you to cast spells, weapon skills and disciplines, and perform swift draws and swift strikes. You can still use weapon skills and disciplines even without Skyborn Might, but they will have less powerful effect, so it's not worth it. The key thing you need to know is how to gain Skyborn Might. This can vary depending on the weapon class, since each weapon has its own method of generating more Skyborn Might. You start off with just one Skyborn Might limit, and you can increase this up to 5 in the skill tree. There is one method to gain Skyborn Might regardless of your weapon, and that is to perfect dodge enemy attacks, which is called Shimmering. Shimmering grants you one stack of Skyborn Might, so it is crucial to try and time your dodges very well during boss fights to be able to keep generating Skyborn Might faster. Now let's discuss quickly about some important weapon traits which you can see in the description of various weapon skills or disciplines. The Clash trait allows you to deflect most of the incoming damage if you attack at the exact same time your enemy is attacking, which is a good way to deal some damage while taking reduced damage. The Deflect trait allows you to essentially perfect parry an enemy, negating all damage and opening up the enemy for a counter attack, while also increasing their stun bar. The best weapon for a Deflect playstyle is the Longsword, due to the sword counter discipline you can equip to any longsword. The Alacrity trait on a certain spells allows you to perfect dodge while casting the spell if you get hit just when you begin casting it. This is a very overpowered mechanic if used right, as it allows you to generate Skyborn Might while spamming spells if you have the Alacrity node unlocked in the skill tree. One last important thing to keep in mind is that all enemies have a stun bar, also called Obliterate value, which you can see in the form of a small yellow circle building up on them. Once this circle is full, you can stun them and perform an Obliterate attack, which does a ton of damage and knocks them down. In order to fill this bar up as efficiently as possible, it is important to try and deal damage constantly, otherwise it will go back down to 0 after some time, and also try to attack from behind to increase it by a greater amount. Deflecting and countering fills up the bar even faster than normal attacks, so keep that in mind. That would be it for this video. I tried to cover the most important mechanics and systems in the game in as little time as possible. Build videos for WUCHANG are coming up in the next few days, but let me know in the comments if you want to see other types of videos for this game. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.